So I always love it when Joe Rogan and Duncan Trussell get together for a conversation, and I want to build off of their conversation by highlighting some of the things that I thought were particularly interesting and developing them a little bit further, particularly the idea of Satan and Satan's community and the idea of a Christian community, a community that is built off of love and self-sacrifice, or a community that is built off of getting what you want and really serving the self. So I'm glad you're with me in this one. Let's get into it.
Told me the best C.S. Lewis quote: "The banality of evil things." So when people consider Satan, or Angel Heart is one of my favorite satanic movies.
Movie.
Oh,
What
De
a great
Niro
movie.
killed it as Satan.
And Mickey Rourke, fucking amazing in that movie.
Dude! But there you have the classic, like, sympathy for the devil version of Lucifer, a kind of gentleman, beautiful, terrifying, not uncompromising, right? Or you get like the Slayer version of the devil, like, just like raining blood out of the sky, blowing up Christians.
Right.
But C.S. Lewis is like, no, that's not what the devil looks like. The devil is boring. The devil actually, the pharmaceutical companies, probably doesn't look like one person being like, you know what? How many kids are going to die? How many yachts does that buy my friends? Just do it. It's modular. It's diffused throughout the company. There's no one person who's like, this will kill a bunch of kids, but there's a lot of little people making tiny little decisions.
Right.
And in that, the pin thing, you push your hand through and you see your hand. That's where you see the devil. It emerges in these complex structures. Right. That's where it is. Some form emerges.
And it's also from diffusion of responsibility.
Absolutely.
So you have a large number of people that are all going along with the thing. That's how you get people to go to war. It's diffusion of responsibility. But you got to get them all to think as a group. You get them all to behave as a group.
Yeah.
And then you can kind of pull it off.
This is the other thing, which is I love about Christianity. Because, if you're going to talk about Satan, you got to talk about Jesus. Because Satan is like generally a Western. There are demons in Hinduism, but in Hinduism, the difference is like the demons, it can become saints. Like the bad thing actually is the vehicle to the good thing. And whereas in the West, just Satan is unredeemably fucking evil. Like there's no way that motherfucker, you can't think about, well, who made Satan?
Right.
You're not supposed to ask that. You can't think about who made Satan, because obviously if there's a God that made everything, God made Satan, and then you have to be like, it's God omnipotent.
Right. Why did he do that?
And then you're like, so God is
Why doesn't God put the brakes on that?
And is there a difference between God and God's creation? And then that means Satan is actually a puppet that God puts on his hands. And then that's where you get into, and this is what I want to bring up with you, man. AI, to train an AI, do you know what they have? The antagonist network. You need something that the AI can basically arm wrestle with to advance.
Really?
Yes. And so Satan in this case is actually the weight that humans lift to become stronger by resistance. It's you resist Satan. Resistance. It's a resistance workout, except it's an ethical resistance workout. Isn't that fascinating?
Now, I thought Duncan was really perceptive here in that he pits Satan against humanity, not Satan against Jesus, because of course Jesus, at least as a Christian, I believe that Jesus is God. He is divine. There is no equal to him. And so Satan as the accuser, Satan as the antagonist is not really the antagonist to Jesus, but is he the antagonist for humanity? We could go back to the garden and look at this and then ask the question that sort of Joe asked, which is, why does God allow this? Is it possible that there is some good that will come from allowing, not causing or creating the evil in the world? But it does seem that if God is all powerful and God is all good, then he might have a good reason for allowing evil to exist for a time. So we live in this battle of good and evil. It's not quite black and white, just like Duncan was saying. The idea in the West that we have of Satan isn't really all that accurate. And the banality of, I think I actually have the C.S. Lewis quote that he was referencing. C.S. Lewis writes this: the greatest evil is conceived and ordered, moved, seconded, carried, and minuted in clean, carpeted, warmed, and well-lit offices by quiet men and with white collars and cut fingernails and smooth-shaven cheeks who do not need to even raise their voices. So yeah, war is evil, and again, we're talking about sort of Satan in general terms. It's like, not the guy with the pointy horns, but the community that is driven to the point of murder and self-destruction is not the community that reflects God's created order, but it reflects the chaotic, fallen nature and sinful nature of this world. And oftentimes it doesn't look like the pointy horns. It looks like people in well-lit offices with shaven faces and cut fingernails who aren't even raising their voices. And I've always thought of more like the mob mentality, that if we had a community that was sort of driven by these sort of satanic forces or these dark forces, the unity would be achieved because people have to give up their identity. And that's the mob mentality of, Joe was saying, groupthink, and just get people to sort of go to war without even questioning the authority. And that is one way. But I thought Duncan's observation about, like, it's really a lot of individual people. There's no unity really in this sort of satanic community. It's a bunch of individual people all compromising for their own selfish desires. We would, from a biblical worldview, call this sin, or the fallen nature of humanity, that we're giving into a disharmony. We're meant to live in harmony with God, and we're giving over to ourselves and choosing disharmony and sin, and we're affirming the fallen nature that we have, ultimately leading to death. And we have it right here in John 10, chapter 10. Jesus says, "The thief comes only to steal and to kill and to destroy. I come that they may have life and have it abundantly." And so the lie is that the pain or the suffering in this world is the greatest evil, when it really isn't. I mean, it's not good, but the greatest evil would be to allow that pain and suffering to pull us away from God. Now, if that pain and suffering can draw us to God, then the pain and suffering is actually transformed into something potentially good.
And so this bullshit that's happening right now, you just got to follow it all the way upstream, if you ask me, and ask yourself, if you're an offended person right now, just ask yourself if your views lead to peace, or if your views lead to disharmony ultimately. And if they don't lead to peace, if there's some anger in you or contempt or fear, then it might be that your view of things isn't in line with what you think your ethics are. That's all. And that creates a lot of internal problems for people. We want the math to work out inside.
When I realized in comedy, I'm like, oh my God, I'm hoping other people fail, instead of being inspired by them.
Right.
Instead of, when I see someone better than me, going, oh my God, I got to work harder.
Right.
I got to get better. I remember the day, because I remember it was like an aha moment, like, oh, not today, Satan. I was like, not today, Satan. Not today, Satan.
Yeah.
So from then on, I became the opposite. I became a supporter of comedians. And I said, no, the way to do it right is to just everybody work hard together and all build off of each other and all help each other, and then be happy when your friends succeed. That's a lot of guys out there. That's the old quote. Most men live lives of quiet desperation. That is so true.
Yeah, it's true.
Because it's hard. It's hard to not be in desperation. It's difficult. And if you're not doing something difficult on top of life, I don't think you ever get free. Like a certain amount of like task-oriented, focused, mission-driven struggle that every human being needs.
Yeah.
And I think if you don't have that, you just become this sedentary ball of cells that just exists based on whatever input's coming in. You're never stable. If you're living in fucking America in 2025, where everybody, even poor people, are fat, and so everybody gets, and there's no starving, right? And you're freaking out about what? You're a side effect of comfort. You're a side effect of a comfortable environment.
Dude, that, my friend, is the description of Satan. You see, this is what I've been thinking, man. It's like, what has happened is the whatever you want to call it, people used to call it the system. The system has convinced a great many people not to be perturbed by the sort of normal things that other people would be perturbed by. For example, if you were, let's say, living in a place and it caught on fire. And then it started catching on fire even more than usual. And I'm saying a long time ago, you would gather your people together and say, the place is catching on fire all the time now. We should leave. And you would leave to a place that wasn't catching on fire all the time. And yet there's places all over the world right now that catch on fire regularly. We used to live in one.
Literally.
And people stay.
Yeah.
Now they don't just stay. They've got very expensive houses in places that catch on fire frequently,
right.
But they stay. Now, if you were to go back in time and tell someone, I want to tell you the story of the man who lived on a hill in a very nice castle, but every year the area around the hill would catch on fire.
Dragons would come.
Dragons would come and burn down the hill, but the man decided to stay in his castle. They would be like, so a story of a fool.
I'm really interested to hear what you think about that we in our modern world have become a side effect of comfort instead of like following wisdom and building our houses where it doesn't catch on fire. We have served comfort and wealth and money and all these other things to the point where we have started to live lives of quiet desperation, but also lives that are detached from wisdom. And they're going to move the conversation into, they don't use the word worship, but essentially, what are we paying attention to? What are we giving our time and our attention to, our energy? Are we serving what the Bible would call Mammon, or are we living lives that are more meaningful, where we can resist that inner complacency? So I'm going to use Grok here to help us out. And just real quick, from a strictly biblical context, Mammon refers to wealth, riches, or material possessions, often personified as a force or entity that can compete with devotion to God. The term appears in the New Testament, specifically in the sayings of Jesus, and is derived from the Aramaic word mammona, meaning riches, profit. It carries a negative connotation, implying that the pursuit of trust in material wealth can lead one astray from spiritual priorities. And that becomes a very important point to realize, that as we turn our time and our attention to these things, they actually have a transformative effect on us. Again, we're talking about two communities that are focused on maybe the self or the antagonist, the enemy, or on devotion to that which is true and good and beautiful, ultimately devotion to God and living in harmony with God's created order for us.
So those numbers, if they're the wrong configuration of numbers, too much red, not enough blue, though, if those numbers are off, even though they have food, shelter, they have health, they're not okay. And so they stop caring about, you're talking about, the basic fundamentals. Like, are you making sure that you know how to do stuff that will keep you alive if things don't work anymore for real?
Yeah.
And they're not.
Right.
And that means that they're sheep to the slaughter. They're getting unhealthy, they're eating bad food, and they're stressing themselves out by the hypno-rectangles, and they're de-skilled. That's the anarchist term. They've become de-skilled. And so what that means is when the lights go out, they're dead. Like, for sure dead. Like, that's the great die-off will happen, because nature is, like in that case, nature is not kind to things that are unhealthy when a survival situation emerges.
Right.
And they are fucking dead. And the reason they're dead is idolatry. They prayed at the altar of the state. They prayed to the state instead of praying at the altar of nature.
They worship false idols.
Yes, and when you worship false idols, God doesn't like that. And if you take that as a worshiping false idols being, if you really are upset right now, like you can't feel good and you can't make yourself exercise and you can't get healthy because the state isn't aligned in the configuration you think it should be.
Wow.
Dude. And so all of your posturing is aligning with the state instead of aligning with nature and getting healthy regardless of the configuration of the state apparatus. Get healthy.
So you never leave the grasp of the state.
Or what?
You never exist. You never have personal sovereignty.
Or the zeitgeist. I say the state as a lazy term for something I think is sadly more diffused in the culture. I don't know what it is. It's some kind of like spirit. But, like when you're talking about like that bitterness you feel at the success of others, which if you're a comic, you have felt that. And if you say you haven't, you're a liar. You're a liar. But you either realize how bad that feels. That's like having an infection. It feels so bad. It feels so gross. And
it is an infection.
You either realize that, And it's not like you can change that all at once, by the way, but you just realize, oh, that's not a good,
right.
That's not a good, if I continue to feel this through my whole life, I'm going to get bitter. And
that's important what you just said too, that you can't fix it all at once.
No.
Again, this is why I love it when Joe Rogan and Duncan get together. And again, they're on to something here. And as a Christian, I hear a lot that is familiar, but at the same time, I also can acknowledge where things are not there. It's like Duncan was saying, you need to be in line with nature. I had previously said we need to be in harmony with the Creator, his created order. I think nature is good, but I certainly wouldn't worship nature. But I can hear what Duncan is trying to get at, like some sense of harmony and grounding that brings us back to what our design is for. And that takes me again back to the idea of worship. We are transformed by the things that we worship. And it's either this spirit of Mammon or the state, like Duncan was saying, some sort of egregore that's out there, or we are transformed into the image of Christ. And that's where it comes to like this idea of you cannot be transformed all at once. You can't work it out all at once. And I would even say you can't work it out, but we can participate with what God is doing in our lives. Ephesians 2, and you were dead in your trespasses and sin in which you formerly walked, according to the course of the world, according to the prince of the power of the air, and the spirit that is now working in the sons of disobedience. I think that is very close, if not the same thing as what Joe and Duncan are talking about. Among whom we all formerly lived in the lusts of the flesh. Duncan said, who of us hasn't fallen for some sort of illusion or cult thinking or ideology? I mean, we all have indulged in the desires of the flesh and of the mind, and we're by nature children of wrath, even to the rest. But verse 8, for by grace you have been saved through faith. It's not of yourselves. It's a gift of God, and not as a result of the works that you do. That doesn't mean that you don't participate. That doesn't mean that you don't have a role to play, because what does he say? He says, you are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand so that you might walk in them. And I think this is a very interesting thing. The concept is a little bit, but we are in Christ. Like if you imagine a cup being put into a big pitcher, we are in Christ. Christ is in us. He fills us as we emerge into him. Not what's the word? Submerge. It's the word that I was looking for there. Duncan was talking about how people are sick or unhealthy. They're not alive inside, and they need to get healthy. Is that a result of serving this spirit, this mammon, something that we think is going to serve us, but we end up serving it and becoming lifeless inside because of that? But yeah, really, really interesting stuff. Now, listen to where this conversation goes. It is fascinating.
Especially if your goal is actual compassion, not idiot compassion. If your goal is actually progression, meaning let's evolve humanity more. Let's get to that, whatever they call it, type A civilization. Let's figure out a way to become intergalactic. Yeah. Let's do it. I think that you have to come up with something transcendent to the zeitgeist that is currently existing, and there has to be massive inclusivity and forgiveness. And then from there, reach down into that fucking pit. Yeah. See how many people you could pull out, not because you want to red pill people or make people into conservatives, but because it's like, dude, just dust yourself off. Which of us have not gotten in a cult? Which of us have not been tricked by some symmetrical person into believing some bullshit? Which of us have not fallen prey to some scam? We all have. I know what that's like. You know what that's like. It's like, and to me, that's sort of the general open-heartedness that needs to be in the world across the board. Across the board.
Yeah, it's Christianity.
Praise Jesus. Praise Jesus.
It really is.
It is.
Christians are some of the most forgiving people I've ever met, like real Christians.
Isn't it beautiful?
Yeah, real Christians are beautiful. The ideas are beautiful, and they're applicable to your life. It'll make your life better. You get better the more you struggle and the more complicated situations you face in your life that require deep thinking and objectivity and character. Yeah. The more you encounter moments where you need character, the more your character develops. And there's just too many people that took the first exit on the road to character and just, got an apartment.
And so we're back to this idea of communities that are built on two great loves, is what Augustine says. The city of man is built off of the love of the self, and the city of God is built off of the love of God, even to the sort of abdication of the self-will. We have to give up our self-will, and that is what is hard. You know, Joe is saying people don't push on, and they don't struggle, and they don't endure. They just go out and get an apartment, you know, because they can live a life of somewhat comfortable means. And Jesus says that if we're going to have true life, this is John 12:25, or 24, truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears fruit. He who loves his life will lose it, and he who hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life. And that's not easy. If you serve me, he must follow me, and where I am, there my servant will be also. If anyone serves me, the Father will honor him. And so these communities, and again, I speak as a Christian person, and I would encourage the church to model this better. We are not perfect people. We live in the in-between time between the inauguration of Jesus' kingdom and its consummation, which is a weird way of saying it, but we live in this in-between time, and we do struggle, and we struggle against the flesh, we struggle against our desires, and we struggle to give of ourselves and live a life of self-sacrifice that would truly build a community. When we began this conversation, I was thinking about how Joe and Duncan looked at these sort of quote unquote, you know, like satanic community, and in one hand it's a bunch of individuated people and no cohesive whole, and that's the, you know, the hand being pressed onto the pins, and Satan sort of emerges out of the individuated people who are all giving up of their wisdom or their honor to serve some sort of selfish means, or the mob. You know, we have to give up of our identity to become a part of a blob that we think will give us a sense of belonging or identity. But here you have a community united by the Spirit of God because a group of people saw something in Jesus that they wanted to model. They came into contact with Jesus and said, you know what, I need to live my life like him. And so it's a community that's not, it's a unity and diversity that's held together by the Spirit and the demonstration of self-sacrifice that we see in Jesus. And I hope that that's hopeful. Sometimes we don't always see the church. Sometimes we don't always see that community existing, but you can hear it right there with Joe. It's clear, you know, like we see it in Christians. The Christians are beautiful. Christianity is beautiful. That's what we are looking for ultimately. And again, the church is not perfect, but Christ, you know, look to Jesus and look to him, and hopefully look to the people who follow him and are being sort of transformed into his image if we, you know, follow him in that harmony that God has intended us for. And there was one part that I kind of overlooked in this, so thanks for hanging in there with me if you've made it to this part. But this is the idea of did God create the devil for something? We kind of touched on it, you know, the idea that the devil is a sock puppet. I don't know that that's really it, but actually J.R. Tolkien in the Silmarillion gives me a great image to build off of, which is God in the Silmarillion creates the angels, and they all sing together. And then one angel, the devil in our case, sings his own song, and he lives this fallen, disobedient life of singing the song that just he wants. He's not interested in being in harmony anymore. And yet God doesn't just eliminate him. He incorporates a new song that incorporates the disobedience, but even becomes something more beautiful. And I think the only way that is possible is with Christ. Death is dead, right? Jesus uses the enemies, the weapons of the enemy to conquer the enemy. It's this wonderfully comedic and ironic heavenly vision of reality that I hope we can learn more about as we go. And I think I've said this in previous podcasts, but it's the people who show you Jesus. It's the people who show you Christianity. Christianity isn't really won in the cultural argument, though it can give answers. But it was Adam Curry a couple of years ago on Joe Rogan who was just talking about the people who showed him true Christianity, showed him Jesus. And it is the people who will, I think, ultimately draw you in. Martin Shaw says that Christianity didn't arrive in Ireland by the tip of the sword, but on the tip of the tongue, as people shared their stories. And I think we see some of that going on today. And so I hope that's an encouragement for you. Thanks for being with me in this one, and I will catch you in the next one.